Welcome, everyone. I'm Lucy White. I'm a principal consultant in the Osborne Group's nonprofit practice. Thank you for taking the time to join us. Today, I'd like to introduce session 2 of our new webinar series, The Fundamentals of a Sustainable Nonprofit. In this series, we're addressing 5 key challenge areas facing nonprofit leaders in light of the pandemic. Our first session focused on strategy, where we emphasize the need to confirm your mission and mandate, remain focused, and ensure strong communications with all your stakeholders as you plan for the future. Today's session on revenue will build on those themes, providing insights on ways to rethink and refine your revenue model to both sustain your organization during the pandemic and prepare for the post-pandemic world.
Thanks, Lucy, and welcome everyone to the webinar today. We all know how COVID-19 has impacted our fundraising. Today, I want to share with you the lessons learned from the past year and how we can rebuild our fundraising efforts going forward. I've been working with the charity during this time and have experienced the challenges firsthand. But in preparation for this webinar, I have reviewed the most current research by Imagine Canada, Canada Helps, and the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy to see what's working in the new world of fundraising during the pandemic. And I'll be sharing these findings with you. My focus is going to be on annual giving, events, digital fundraising, volunteers, and capital campaigns, not on government or United Way fundraising. So let's start with the Canada Helps 2021 Giving Report. That was just released last week. It identifies 7 key trends in Canadian fundraising. So let's review those 7 trends. 1, online donations have continued to accelerate at record rates, even as the total giving fell. Canadians donated in huge numbers to help during the COVID-19 pandemic. Online giving skyrocketed to charities working with Indigenous communities. And after the protests last May, young people donated more to social justice movements than in the past. Online donations to environmental charities continued growing faster than other categories. International disasters also generated spikes in online giving, and Giving Tuesday is still one of the most important giving days of the year. Now, you know this better than I do. The challenging news is that although online donations accelerated in 2020, Canada Helps projects a 10% decline in overall giving in 2021, and many of you are probably feeling the impact of that. They project giving will fall to 2016 levels. So many things have changed due to COVID-19. That is important to make sure that your organization's strategic plan is relevant to today's environment because so many things have changed due to the pandemic. It may be time to update or refresh your strategic plan. The same is also true for your annual fundraising plan. It's probably time to rethink, maybe refresh your plan. And it's also crucial to make sure that your fundraising plan is linked with your refreshed strategic plan. Now, charities related to specific causes like health, criminal justice, Indigenous, anti-racism, and seniors are clearly benefiting during the pandemic far more than others who have experienced serious declines in donations. This means that communication of your strategy and, more importantly, your changing needs due to the pandemic are more important than ever for your annual giving campaigns, especially if your organization doesn't fall into one of these categories. Joel's going to talk even more detail about communication, but keep that in mind throughout the rest of the webinar. Now is not the time to avoid your donors, especially your major donors. Make a list of your top donors and schedule calls. Remember, Zoom is often more personal than regular telephone calls. Reach out. Ask how your major donors and their families are doing during the pandemic. Check in, ask about their businesses, ask about their work, see how things are going there. Ask for assistance. Share how these uncertain times are impacting your charity and the clients you serve. If your needs have increased due to the pandemic or downturn in the economy, let your donors know. Don't be shy and hold back. Share what you need and offer ways your donors can help. Ask for their support. Many donors are ready to step up if only given the chance. And remember, follow up. Thank your donors. Gratitude goes far. Take time to extend genuine and heartfelt thanks. If you're not doing it now, go back to handwritten thank you notes or pick up the phone just to say thanks. And finally, do not make assumptions on what your donors will or will not do because of the pandemic. Ask them. So let's talk a little bit about a variety of annual giving strategies and how they have changed and adapted due to the pandemic. Direct mail and digital fundraising have shown solid returns during the pandemic, but the strategies are clearly changing. It's time to be creative. One client I'm working with started using stories as part of their online ask. They interviewed a client's family and wrote the interview up as a story in the client's words. They posted it online with the client making the ask to support their agency. They also mailed out the story with a personal ask from the client to their major donors. It's time to rethink your digital and mail campaigns. In 2020, in a study in 2020 completed by the Lilly Family School of Philanthropy, it was found that 32% of those surveyed donated to a crowdfunding effort. We're all familiar with those. Although people are most likely to give to appeals made by a family member or friend, 47% of those surveyed said they had donated to a not-for-profit that was on a crowdfunding platform. This is a really important trend to follow closely and possibly test out with your charity. Although the statistic and the study is from the US, crowdfunding is growing in popularity across Canada, and there are a number of crowdfunding platforms in Canada that you can explore and use. In-person events were canceled early on in the pandemic, and they're the lifeblood of many of our fundraising efforts. They have now been revived as online events. If you haven't already, explore how your gala, your marathon, your walkathon, your car wash, etc., can be redesigned as an online event. Consider educational online events to educate your donors, to stay in touch with them. Educate your volunteers about an issue close to your mission. Engage a well-known person to host the event or chair the webinar. Remind your supporters that you are still active during the pandemic. Major gifts, corporate giving, and foundation donations were significantly pulled back at the beginning of the pandemic due to the effect of the poor markets and the slowdown in their return on investments. But this has improved, and donors are beginning to step up and increase their support again. Your story about how your agency and your clients have been impacted by the pandemic needs to be central to your ask. There has been an unexpected surge and interest in legacy giving, as many people have been motivated by the pandemic to either make or revise and update their wills. More people are now making provisions to support their favorite charities in their wills due to the pandemic. Now is the time to remind your donors about legacy giving and how they can support your charity in their wills. Consider your volunteers as donor prospects. Volunteers have often been unable to volunteer in person during COVID, but are still highly committed to your organization. Many will be willing to donate dollars instead of time if only asked. Studies have shown that volunteers, on average, donate 10 times more. That's right, you heard it right, 10 times more than prospects who do not volunteer. So effectively communicate your charity's ask when talking to your volunteers. Learn to listen to your volunteers as donor prospects. Don't focus solely on your charity's needs. Tell a story about your clients. Keep your pitch simple and to the point. Thank your volunteers for all of their efforts. Ensure them there will soon be a time for them to return to their valuable volunteer work and that your charity is continuing to pursue your mission. Consider a Zoom call to update your volunteers and just stay in touch. Let them know how close you are to getting ready to starting up again, hopefully later this summer with in-person volunteering. Communicate all the good things your organization is able to accomplish with donations. And again, send your new volunteer donors personalized thank you cards, or give them special recognition as recurring or major volunteer donors. Feature them on your website and blogs and social media. And important for all these categories of volunteers in your capital campaign, thank them. Although we know the importance of thanking our donors, today it has become even more important because we don't have regular involvement with them. Be creative. Here's some examples to get you started, but be creative and innovative in how you thank your donors for past as well as current donations. Communicate. Now is the time to thank your donors, volunteers, and friends. Be creative. Hold webinars or Zoom calls to inform your donors about how you're responding to the pandemic. Don't necessarily make an ask, just educate and stay in touch. Consider sending out personalized thank you cards, especially to your major donors or new volunteer donors. The cards could be just a thank you for their ongoing support or mentioning a recent donation. Consider special recognition to major donors in newsletters, e-newsletters, blogs, on social media, or feature the top donors on your website. Now let's end off by talking about capital campaigns. Many of you probably paused your capital campaigns like one of my clients did after the pandemic struck. The good news is that corporations, foundations, and major donors' investments have improved, and they are beginning to step up and increase their support for capital campaigns again. So it's time to start up again if you did pause that campaign. Your story about how your agency and your clients have been impacted by the pandemic needs to be central to your ask and linked to your capital campaign if possible. You'll need to revisit your original timeline and may have to lengthen it to take into account a slower uptake by potential donors as they readjust to a post-pandemic world. In adjusting to a post-pandemic world, you may also need to adjust your goals. One organization I was working with had planned a $12 million capital campaign prior to the pandemic. They are now getting ready to relaunch their campaign and have decided to adjust their goals and break the campaign into two parts. The first is a $4 million campaign to purchase a property, and the second will then be an $8 million campaign to construct their buildings. There are many ways you can adjust your goals. This is just one example, but it's important to have those discussions before you relaunch your campaign. I hope this part of the presentation has been helpful. COVID-19 has forced us to rethink how we fundraise. Remember, be creative, try new ways of fundraising, remind your donors of your clients and your agency's changing needs, and remember to thank your donors. Now I'd like to turn it over to Joel Peters, who will talk about the importance of communication. Joel?
Thanks very much, Alice. Those are some very helpful insights into fundraising these days and the new trends. Social media became a lifeline to our organizations during COVID, and we saw everyone move along in their journeys to embrace online communications. Not only for letting all stakeholders know what was going on daily and how to connect with your services, it also performed a critical function in connecting and building communities of support, and that's the foundation of fundraising efforts. Using multiple platforms, organizations can reach many different audiences, and perhaps the best characteristic of social media is that when it's used well, it facilitates two-way communications between all stakeholders and our organizations. Now that so much about agencies' communication efforts have moved online, the question that will come forward as we move into a post-pandemic phase: what do we keep? What do we let go? My own experience in a post-secondary university environment during a prolonged crisis was that staff found remarkable ways to create efficiencies. Whether through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or posted media releases, all of the channels were important and needed to be updated quickly. We found ways to do that. Biggest challenge was that staff who were monitoring and maintaining a dialogue with stakeholders, both internally and externally, were in danger of burnout. To get started, they needed training and draft scripts. We provided daily debriefs to our teammates and helped engage and manage workload so people could recharge. As managers, we needed to listen carefully to hear what our supporters were saying and to work with them as frontline communicators to craft a menu of potential responses. Training and active management will be required to support your fundraising campaigns. And again, the great benefit of social channels is a two-way communications, and it requires a lot of extra attention to the people on both ends of those conversations. With the high cost of print media and the timelines required, we will ideally leave print behind if our audiences can do without. However, some organizations will end up with a hybrid of traditional and online media to sustain their efforts. My favorite film festival, for example, Hot Docs. They've transitioned its offerings into a streaming channel with Crave. They still felt it was necessary to create and distribute a 36-page print piece, so a lot of expense there. But to me, that's a hybrid model, and while it's tempting to go 100% online, the reality will be more complicated. It needs to be tested and evaluated each step of the way. Student recruitment for university is another example. Most young people are completely comfortable online, and as Ellis has said, a lot of the online sources of fundraising have increased due to their participation. So while they're comfortable, colleges and universities continue to print a view book, which is an elaborate program guide. The reality is that when parents and grandparents, aunts and uncles see the printed material, they feel comfortable that Brendan and Ashley and Ibrahim are actively involved in choosing a future school. So in the short to intermediate term, both traditional and online communications need to be maintained, and your challenge will be determining which to keep, which to leave behind, and when to go hybrid. And to do this effectively, you need to check in with your audiences, either through a survey or use the channels that can give you regular feedback, or in an actual fundraising campaign, monitor carefully the financial results and the response rates. Print media is still valuable. The Association of Fundraising Professionals, for example, recently ran this ad in partnership with the Globe and Mail. It was done as a public service and illustrates that while most of our activity has moved on, there's still a support role for print media. As Ellis has outlined the different components of a well-rounded fundraising program, a major responsibility of communications is to be aligned and supportive of these efforts. From providing your clients with the nuts and bolts of how to access your agency, what services are available, and which cannot be provided during COVID, Complete Communications will use this opportunity to reinforce your present-day strategy. So take the opportunity to highlight how that ties into your existing mission and mandate, and more importantly, from a revenue perspective, what will be required to move the agency forward and to achieve all of your goals. The media, for honesty and transparency, have aligned very well with what the public expected to hear during the pandemic. That same alignment will be required as nonprofits move forward to resume a full slate of activity and programs. We believe it's important to continue to reflect health concerns as we look long-term, but the focus can be broader, shifting to the full needs of people, their families, their communities, and the environment. Important social justice issues, some of it which Ellis enunciated for us, continue to reflect health concerns as we look long-term, but the focus can be broader, shifting to the full needs. Your program, for example, and the extent to which your program delivers an inclusive and an equitable way to the public should be highlighted. And if appropriate, include the extent to which you have reflected climate change and the environment in program delivery in your messaging. One example of how well nonprofits have adjusted in a creative way is this event in support of Autism Canada. They've been very clever, like many organizations, in presenting different options for people to participate in their upcoming walk, with 4 virtual events and an in-person walk with masks and appropriate physical distancing. And as with media, this hybrid model of program delivery will likely continue into the intermediate future. And while in-person events are great for sharing energy and building a sense of community, online media are equally adept and excellent at portraying the energy and commitment of the people and the communities you serve. Video in particular can capture the spontaneity and sincerity of people committed to your cause. I have found that most people are very willing to talk on camera about their experiences. I'll expand on how best to use video in a moment. And if you have real estate, let your clients and their families help generate images on the side of buildings or on exterior hoarding. And best to always think cross-platform. Social media like Instagram is great for sharing the energy and enthusiasm that people bring to the events you hold. Ellis mentioned the importance of good storytelling, and using video is easily the most cost-effective and impactful way to capture and share good stories. What often ends up happening, though, is that videographers can get carried away, and they approach a video like it's an epic Hollywood production. It's not, and it's best if you don't, for many reasons, go that route for both your viewers and your supporters. Spare the special effects and the elaborate graphic setups. Let people talk. Capture them as naturally as possible, and you will find they can be very compelling in delivering your message through video. The most important part of the production process is bringing discipline to the editing. You as a manager may be called upon to be the objective voice as to what stays and what goes. From experience, I can tell you that few but your closest family, friends, and relatives will watch a video longer than a minute. Best to hone any video that's pushing out a message for you down to 30 seconds or less. One exception to this rule are fundraising videos for your committed audiences and high interest prospects. Where there is a heartfelt message, you can venture into videos that run as long as 2 to 3 minutes. But that's only successful when the audience comes with you and it's very dedicated and the video is emotionally engaging. The final point on this topic for today, just posting a video on your website is not enough. Encouraging friends and supporters to share them with their friends is an important first step. But the hidden secret of gaining views effectively and cheaply is that most successful videos get a push from paid views as video pre-roll, and you don't need a big investment to reach your target audience. So even though we're experiencing some of the worst days of the pandemic now in this third wave, there is hope on the horizon. We're very optimistic that the race to vaccinate is winning the day, and we will have a summer and a fall ahead of us when we begin to enjoy the fullness of life once again. When people are able to congregate in public, there is the prospect of special events and galas resuming in the months ahead. For agencies delivering community benefits, people gathering to celebrate life is a critical element of fundraising. Communications which inform your stakeholders of everything you stand for and the role you play in supporting a strong community will be required as part of that. Timing may be uncertain at the moment, but thinking ahead to prepare your fundraising strategy for what comes next is a step you can begin to take. Now I'd like to turn things over to David McMichael, who will moderate our Q&A session.
So what is your view on board members being asked to give dollars as well as time, and whether this is creating barriers to engaging diverse communities in volunteering?
Thanks, David, for the question. It's one that comes up almost with every organization that I work with. It's absolutely important for your board members to donate to the cause. When going out to the community, if anyone asks, is your board donating? You need to be able to say absolutely 100%. Every single board member is donating. But on the flip side, when I'm sitting around the table and talking to board members and talking about the importance of this, I also say you need to donate within your own means. Even if it's only $5, at least your board can say every board member is donating out to participate in donations if they don't have the means to do it. That has to be respected, but as long as everybody gives a small amount, and it could be within the board, it could be confidential. Other board members don't need to know how much each one has given, but as long as they can report that 100% of board members have donated, it's an important message to give to your community when you're asking for support.
What is the best way to communicate an updated strategic plan?
I think a couple of things. One, you clearly need to go and get input from across your audiences. Whether these are volunteers, board members, your clients. There's input required on all of those fronts. So then there's the process of developing. So the input at the front end of a session, of a strategic planning session, creates a lot of energy and brings people into it. I think where the question goes is how do you communicate once a plan has been updated? I think some of the pieces, educating your community by allowing them in to have a Zoom call or a webinar like this to talk about the changes that have been introduced in the plan, particularly if there have been pivots. If your organization has started to do some other activities behind, then having as public an airing as possible as the results of that would be a good way to go. Again, a blog from executive directors and board chairs is another vehicle to letting people see renewed within a communication effort. And finally, again, the openness and transparency part is let people know that it's been updated, post it on your website, get messaging out to your people so they can come and see what's different and have a good summary available of a full plan so that the key elements can be visible to people. So it's
if I can,
question, but I think that's a lot of it. Ellis, anything to add?
Yep, if I can just add to that, Joel, I'm just finished working with an organization on their strategic plan. They had a lot of discussion around how to communicate, and I thought they had some really good points. First of all, they recognized that a lot of the strategic plan had to do with internal operations of the organization that probably aren't of interest to the public. So they're creating what they call an external facing plan. What are the components of their strategic plan that are really of interest to their audience? And they're going to create a very simple infographic, a one-page graphic that can be shared on social media, that can be emailed out to people, that can be printed and hard copies given out, but really focusing on the key aspects of the strategic plan that are of interest and importance to their multiple different stakeholder publics. And so they're thinking about it from a marketing perspective. How can they package it in a very simple, clean infographic and share the message so that people will read it?
I'd like to hear more about crowdfunding for nonprofits. Could you elaborate a little bit on how the process works, i.e. how do we get started?
I'm not an expert in crowdfunding. I'll be honest right up front with that, but I do think you need to pick your cause very clearly and have very, very focused. Usually crowdfunding has a real urgency to the cause. We often hear about it with individuals that need medical treatment, or they need housing, they've lost the housing, or other issues that are of immediate importance. So you need to think about your agency, your organization, and what's a bite-sized project that has a real immediacy to it that you can put a pitch out and ask for funds around. I don't know if anyone else, Lucy or Joel, if you might have any thoughts on that as well.
I guess I would add that we saw one of our neighbors recently get behind the push for increased sick benefits for workers in Ontario. And I think it falls to your point, Ellis, is it lacked credibility on a couple of fronts. One, because of the scale. It needed to be a smaller piece that people could identify with. And secondly, it needed to be anchored with an organization that had credibility. And so it was a kind of a fail on both of those levels. So, again, staying focused and staying in your wheelhouse where your competencies will be recognized, I think is an important part. Lucy, do you want to add in there?
I will add that I personally have concerns about crowdfunding. I think that people get very enthusiastic very quickly and they don't do their due diligence about what is the right platform, what is the right cause to promote in crowdfunding. And I also have, we've watched a couple of crowdfunding events that just exploded. And I think that we need to make sure that we're prepared for success and we're prepared for failure, because crowdfunding rules differ by platform. And we've seen a couple of crowdfunding that one for the US organization where everybody was dumping the ice bucket challenge thing, and then the crowdfunding for that major traffic accident involved the hockey team in Alberta. So we have to be careful to do the planning, but when it's done well, it can really, really be a huge benefit for your organization.
Yeah. So David, if I might jump into having done a couple of these kind of campaigns, there's a couple of preferred tools to look at first on the technology side. For not-for-profit, there's a solution called Mighty Cause, M-I-G-H-T-Y Cause, which is specifically aimed at not-for-profit crowdfunding. And it reflects the sorts of elements Joel and Alice spoke to, which are you have to have the urgency, you have to have dead clear message, very simple process. On a broader level, and it can be applied for either not-for-profit or for-profit, is a platform called Indiegogo, I-N-D-I-E Go. So either of those are worth a look if you're new to the crowdfunding game.
So this person says, we are having difficulty in senior leadership understanding the importance of social media. They don't feel that it's an effective way to bring in prospective donors and/or raise funds. Do you have any suggestions on what information can be shared with them to show how important it is for us to have a consistent online presence and to ensure that we dedicate time and minimal dollars towards it?
Yeah, that's a great question. And thank you for tabling that with the group. I'm sure there'll be others that will want to weigh in on this answer. I think seniors do fall into two categories, and we have seen this with registrations for vaccines. There are some that have taken to it readily, and it has become an adjunct of their lives. They're using email, they're on Facebook, they're using various platforms. And there's others that aren't using it at all and need some help. And so groups that have intervened are important. To me, I guess the first side of it is again, as I stressed in my presentation, you still need to go hybrid. So my suggestion would be to start small, but you need that Facebook presence. You need a presence on Instagram if you're holding events, but you also then have to work at building the community. And there's ways to do that. You can use promotional giveaways, etc., to your online audience as you begin to collect them. But when you're dealing with seniors, I think you're going to have to keep a foot in both worlds, and just again be patient and bring them along. That's how it strikes me at this point. It's not something you can rush. Again, let me ask my colleagues whether any want to contribute to that.
I'd add to it, Joel, if you're having challenge with your senior management and leadership team to get involved in social media, I think you need to talk about the importance that it's another way, a more current way of friend building, and fundraising is all based on friend building. You have to build up your friends before you can move them into donors. And many people today live on social media. It's a very simple way versus in the past of reaching more and more people, which we didn't have that access to in the past. So your social media really should be focused on educating the public about your cause, about the needs, and gradually moving them, those for new friends into donors.
So we have a question from Lois, who's asking about virtual fundraising specifically. She's just wondering if you can provide any examples. Maybe Joel, maybe Alice, you might be able to speak on that.
There are many different examples. I'm going to talk about two that I'm familiar with, but there are event type of campaigns. And if either, Neil, Joel, or Lucy can talk about those that have gone virtual, I'm going to talk about one was a matching campaign that an organization had last year. They went out and found 4 donors, each contributed $5,000 towards the campaign. So they had a $20,000 matching campaign. And then they went out to the public on a virtual campaign asking for people to match the $20,000, and they surpassed their $20,000 goal. So they ended up raising close to $50,000 in total. And they're repeating that campaign this year. And it looks so far at early starts that they're going to be just as successful. Another virtual campaign was the one I mentioned in my presentation, where they spoke to a family who talked about the young adults' sons' challenges and how important the services that this organization was going to provide were, and that they had to send their son to the States to receive this service for $1,000 a day, and that it wasn't available here, and the agency was planning on starting it up. And they wrote that story up, that interview up as a personal story signed by the family, the parents, and the parents were the ones making the ask. And they put that out on social media, on all their social media streams. They also formatted it, did a little bit of marketing and formatted the story, and mailed, and had a mail campaign too. So they blended a mail campaign with a virtual campaign using the same pitch and same ask. And that was highly successful. More than they had done in the traditional ways, actually, because they had a larger audience that was already committed. They went to everybody that was on their newsletter, everybody that had signed up and was receiving their newsletter, and therefore their regular informational blogs that were going out weekly. So they were already well-educated supporters. And it was, again, coming back to how do you sell social media to management? They already had a few thousand committed supporters who stayed in touch via social media, and they sent that ask out to them, and a majority of them actually donated. So it was a highly successful ask. So that's a type of virtual campaign, but it's not the type of campaign that's replacing a gala or a walkathon. Although last year we participated in the Scotiabank walkathon 2 years ago. And last year we turned it into a virtual walkathon. And we, meaning the agency that I was just talking about. And they were very successful in the virtual walkathon. It wasn't as successful as people coming out in person, but it was still more than successful. And they achieved the lower goal that they had set for the campaign. Any other examples, Lucy or Joel?
Yeah. Yeah, I can speak to your point around galas. I'm aware, now I'm not privy to the numbers because I'm not inside these organizations, but a local to me food security organization switched up its gala, which had been a very elaborate event with chefs and stations and other kinds of entertainment, and they switched it up to so for your ticket, instead of attending the gala, what you got was a box that contained lots of elements of a gala. So there were lots of fun things in it. There was hats and things so that you could participate in the festive part of the gala. But the innovative part was, instead of providing people with a cooked meal, they provided them with the elements of the meal and instructions and recipes. so that they would have not only the opportunity to enjoy the meal and talk about the food, but also to prepare it. So they were very creative in the way that they approached moving their gala from a big swishy event to something much more local and much more grassroots, which interestingly was more on mission for this organization to start with. They made quite a lot of money. I'm not sure they made as much as they had made gross before, but their net was much higher because they didn't have a lot of the associated costs with putting on a live event. So that's my example.
That reminds me of another one, Lucy, in the music industry, a local jazz festival, and they generate a lot of the revenue by having local jazz events. They went online and they were holding the jazz festival online with all the different musicians. They also had much lower costs because these musicians did not have to come in from all over Canada and the States. But what they did was in the city where they were originated, and most of their supporters were, they partnered with a number of local restaurants. And you can either buy a ticket to the event only, or you can buy a dinner and ticket to the event, and it would be for pickup, curbside pickup. And there were 3 restaurants or 4 restaurants that all had specialized menus for the event, and you can choose 2 or 3 different options from whichever restaurant you preferred, and you can pick it up prior to the event and eat your dinner during the event. This Sunday night is the actual event, and my wife and I are going to be participating in it. We've ordered a type of restaurant we would have never gone to. So it's supporting local business as well as supporting the jazz festival in Niagara. So a very innovative way of again generating revenue. And as you said, their costs are a whole lot lower than if they were bringing these artists in from all over North America for the event. So they're hopefully will be raising in net probably more than they would have in the first place.